The API I want to use in my demo is the github.com API, and I do this for 3 reasons. The github.com API has 3 characteristics which very few real APIs with real data have. Number 1, the API is available to call from JavaScript in a browser. Number 2, the response is in JSON format, which is easy to consume from JavaScript. In fact, Angular's HTTP service will automatically convert a JSON response into a JavaScript object for me. And number 3, the service does not require me or you to sign up and provide authentication credentials or some sort of client or application key, so it's easy to use. This isn't to say the situation might change in the future, but I hope you'll still be able to use this API when you view this video. Here's what an API call looks like. I can go there right from a browser that will issue an HTTP GET request. And this is a GET request to api.github.com/users/odecode. So I'm asking for the user details on the GitHub user odecode. And I can see a response that will give me data like the name of the user, the location of the user, even the gravatar of the user, which is the image commonly associated with this user. So I'm using this GitHub API to simulate data that you might get back from your web server for your application. It comes from your database, but I don't want to set all that up just to learn Angular. So let's try to use this GitHub API as a source of data. Inside of our controller, let's get rid of the fake person data that I constructed, and instead, let's ask Angular for the HTTP service, and we can use that to call the GitHub API. So I want to issue a GET request to HTTPS, so this is secure sockets, api.github.com/users, and now instead of me, let's use Rob Connery. HTTP GET is going to return a promise. So I don't get details about Rob Connery immediately. What I need to do with that promise is invoke a then method and process the result. And I can do that by writing a function here, an anonymous function that I just pass into then, or I can write a named function up here, a private implementation detail of the controller, and just pass that function into the then method. We did some of the same sorts of things inside of the introduction. So on user complete is I have gotten the details of the user in a response from that HTTP request. The promise will pass in the response. All I really need to do is pick out the data portion of that response, and I can say scope.user equals response.data. So this web server will send data back in JSON format. Angular will automatically deserialize that data into a JavaScript object for me, and now scope.user will have the same properties that we saw in the previous slide for that response from GitHub. It's going to have properties like name, location, avatar URL. All I need to do is tell then that the function to call when this HTTP request is successful is on user complete. And that will put everything I need into my user object. Let me turn on auto refresh. And we'll go over to our view and fix this up to work with the new information we have. We don't have first name and last name anymore. Instead, what we have is the user's name, which is user.name. We have the user's location, which is user.location. And now for the image, I have that avatar URL. So let me first set the title of the image to user.name. So when a user mouses over, they can see that that is the person's name. And ng source now becomes user.avatar_URL. And again, if you don't remember what these properties are, you can just launch a web browser and go to this URL. You will see those properties in the output. But now that we've put all this together, we do get Rob's name and location and image on the screen. So let me show you one more thing about the HTTP service. What would happen if the server was down, or let's say I just had a typo in the URL that I was trying to get to? Well, that will create an error in the console. I can see that that URL ap.github.com, it couldn't load for whatever reason. And of course, my preview screen goes blank because now I don't have a user attached to scope. There's no data available. This function that I pass into the then method, the first function I pass in, That's only invoked if the get call or the post or the put or the delete, whatever you're using, it's only invoked if that call is successful and the web server returns a successful response. If there's an error, I can pass a second function to then that will be called if there's an error. So let's write a function on error. That's a function. I will actually get a reason for that error, which will contain all sorts of technical details about the HTTP request. Perhaps I'm not interested in any of that. I just want to tell the user that I could not fetch the user and just have that on the screen so there's some visible indication that something went wrong. And now I can come into index.html and I can find a location where I could put that message. So perhaps up here, I could just say bind error and now could not fetch the user appears. If I go back into script.js and I fix my call, now we're back to getting Rob's information. So this is the HTTP service. Very easy to use. You just have to remember how to program with promises. Invoke a then method and give it a function to call when you have a successful response and grab the data out of that. You can also optionally give it a second function if there's an error, inspect the reason, and probably tell the user that something has gone wrong.